Hello, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you might be. My name is Sean, and I'm delighted you are joining us for today's ESBC Community Webinar. Today I'm joined by Alec Harrison, MVP, who will cover Azure AI Studio / Open AI offerings. We look forward to hearing what you guys have to say, so remember to join in on the conversation about today's webinar and more on X. Our handle is at ESBC_community, and our hashtag is hashtag ESBC24. Tweet us, tag us, and tell us what you learned. Don't forget to check out our Learning Hub, which is updated daily with the latest blogs, ebooks, webinars, and how-to videos. You can access and view the Learning Hub by visiting our website, sharepointeurope.com, and clicking the Content tab at the top. Don't let the learning stop here. Continue to keep up and stay ahead by joining us for our next Azure Week webinar. Turn your rags to riches using Azure Open AI with Alexander Billington. This webinar will take place Wednesday, 17th of July, 2024 at 1 p.m. to 2 p.m. CEST. For more information on this webinar, please check out www.sharepointeurope.com/register for webinars. Join us for an exclusive opportunity at hashtag FabCon Europe with our super early bird sale. Act now and secure your ticket before Friday, July 19th, to unlock incredible savings of up to €700. Don't delay, register today to reserve your place and take advantage of this limited time offer. Book your tickets today at www.sharepointeurope.com/European Microsoft Fabric Community Conference. Early bird sale alert for hashtag ESBC24. Deep dive into the latest governance, Azure, SharePoint, Copilot, Microsoft Teams, Viva Topics, API, AI, Microsoft Entra, Power Automate, Microsoft Purview, and more. Don't miss out. Register your interest today at www.sharepointeurope.com/pricing. After this webinar, we'll have a questions and answer session. Type any questions you might have into the questions box. Questions will be selected and answered at the end of the presentation. This webinar will be recorded and added to the Resource Center, where you'll be notified by email when it is available. And now, I'm going to pass you over to today's webinar presenter, Alec. Hello, Alec. Thanks for joining us today.
Hello, thanks for having me. I'll go ahead and share my screen here. Pop up the PowerPoint. There we go.
Yeah,
so
I can see it.
Sweet. Thanks for introducing me. Thanks for having me. And thanks everybody for listening. Feel free to put your questions in the chat. Depending on the question, we might wait till the end or feel free to interrupt in the middle. We're going to kind of play it by ear. So we'll kind of see how that goes. So the reason I titled this talk, or the impetus of it from the beginning, was I wanted to figure out a way, when new technology comes out, we want to find the best logical way to, use it in something or try to do something that before would be really difficult or cost a lot of money. Before we roll into this, who am I and why should you care of what I have to say? I'm a software consultant out of a tiny little company in Des Moines, Iowa, in the US called Lean Techniques. I'm actually in Omaha, Nebraska in the States. I'm a Microsoft MVP in both AI and Azure, and I host a podcast, run some user groups. If you want to reach out to me, feel free. There's my personal and professional email. If you have any questions, comments, concerns, or have any follow-ups. We also run Azure Cloud workshops. So our idea is that they're open source, free workshops. If you want to learn Azure on different topics, we try to maintain them and try to purposely do it as cheaply as possible. So if you're trying to learn on your own dime, you can do that and not have a huge Azure bill. Because in the end of the day, if you're learning on your own and you don't have a Visual Studio Enterprise, it kind of stinks if you have to spend money. So we do our best to really call out where you need to spend money and minimize costs as much as humanly possible. And that QR code does lead to my podcast, who I do with fellow MVP and Microsoft certified trainer Brian Gorman. So a high-level overview for this is, why should we care about AI? why Azure OpenAI is better than other products. We'll walk through Azure OpenAI, see if it really is as cool as the hype. We'll do a basic example, and then we can talk about RAG or a little bit of enterprise sample we'll sprinkle in at the end. So, kind of why I think people should really look at Azure for AI offerings. This chart, when I drew it, is a few months old now, but it's called a wordly map. The idea is that basically technology moves further to the right as it's developed. So you kind of have your Genesis, so this is new and it's a gamble. You then have custom software. So this would be like building some more LLMs. This is kind of where your pioneers in technology are. People who have very specific use cases, and money isn't really an object. They just really need to solve a problem. And then you kind of move into a product where you might buy something off the shelf where, oh, hey, I'm buying this product because it specifically has feature X. So you could think of like ChatGPT is kind of this way. It's a product that you purchase if you want to use AI. Then we kind of roll into a commodity based where the product or the technology itself starts becoming table stakes. So you don't really think about it. It's just there, it's built in. You use the product because it's there, not and because of what it helps you do, not necessarily because it just has AI. So think of like if you look at Google Docs, Word, like spell check, grammar check, all those things, you don't really go out of your way to buy Office because it has spell check in it. You buy Office, and as a byproduct of it being a word editor in the current year, you just expect for it to have it. So that's kind of what I think the envision is here is that technology, as it progresses and moves along, it gets closer and closer to commodity based. And that's kind of where Azure we feel or I feel is today is it's getting closer and closer to that commodity based, especially when you can just wire into Azure OpenAI um, and just use a lot of the off the shelf models and offerings that they have today. I would say Amazon was probably here if you're an AWS shop. Being honest and transparent, they are moving further to the right. So I drew this line before they had their Bedrock model. So I'd even say they're moving probably more towards here-ish if I had to guess. It's not the greatest model in the world, but it's actually making a lot of strides in catching up and trying to close the gap. But I think there's always an argument of Azure is still probably a little bit further ahead. And I think GCP is probably somewhere between here as well, between Azure and probably Amazon, just with their Gemini models being out a little bit longer. They're getting some more data and getting some more usage. So, why do I think Azure OpenAI is the best? Well, when you just use Open or ChatGPT and OpenAI's offering, a lot of your data can still go back to the model to retrain it. So depending on how much you pay for it, at what tier, what you could be asking it, what you could be feeding it, could be going back to train the greater model. If you're doing little sample projects at home, maybe you don't care. But if you're doing anything for work that is somewhat proprietary or that you don't want to get out, or if you need to control where your data is flowing, that can kind of be a problem because you don't know what the model's taking back. You don't know how much of it it's taking back. You don't really have that transparency. So that could be an issue. There was a big tech company that early on in ChatGPT days had their source code actually leaked because they asked enough questions of it with the engineers that, and it was such a finite use case. If you started asking it questions in the same realm, their source code came out. So you don't want to be that company that has its source code leaked by an OpenAI model. So I'd say it's probably not the best option for you. There is some caveats. If you pay for an enterprise or a Teams license, they do put in your TOS or terms of service that they won't train on your data. But again, just use at your own risk. Make sure you do your due diligence of reading, hey, does it actually train it on my data? What does that look like? Am I secure for my use case? I think the next one is Bard. So this is Google's offering. Um, it's kind of a work in progress. I think they've put it out and pulled it back a couple times on different releases just from I think My speculation is the very first one was a little bit not completely baked, but it's been making a lot of strides and it's actually getting a lot better. Um, but I think if I'm going to production with something, I want something that is the most robust and built. I think Bedrock could also be on here, but it again is Amazon's first attempt at a model uh, that's fully hosted that you can use kind of a consumption based model and approach for. It's okay. Again, it's kind of in the same boat as Bard. It's getting better. Uh, it's not probably, I'd say, on par with OpenAI or ChatGPT's models. And then you have OpenAI in Azure. So Azure OpenAI not only will not train on your models, it also comes with the same data security and privacy as your Azure tenant. So all of your data will stay inside your tenant. Your data never goes back to the model. The only thing that does go or stored is the prompts itself. So there is a machine learning algorithm that goes through and makes sure that you're using AI responsibly. If it's flagged, that can then potentially be manually reviewed by a person if you're breaking the terms of service, and then that person can then decide, hey, do you do you need to lose access to OpenAI or not? You can't even opt out of that if you want to. So if you have a, for example, if you're trying to use PII or something to that effect, you can go out to Microsoft and opt out and say, hey, we might be using sensitive information here. We don't want to save that data. So you can, again, get even further away from any sort of data stored on you in that sort of case. We'll go ahead and go into a live demo here. So what you might first ask yourself is, if I want to use this, what do I need to do? So I like to search MS Learn, Azure OpenAI. This link does usually change a lot. So I usually say to find this Microsoft Learn article, we'll scroll down and this is the responsible AI. So basically talks to you about how to use it safely, don't use it for bad purposes, that sort of thing. And then we can actually go to apply now. So if you do want to fill this out, this is how you get access at a subscription level. It is general availability, so anybody can get access to it. You just have to explicitly request subscriptions. So make sure you use your subscription ID. You do also, where they ask for an email address, I believe it has to be a company email address. So it does have to be a managed email. So your personal at Gmail, at Hotmail, at Outlook will more than likely be rejected. But if you used one managed by your company, um, or even like a managed Gmail or a managed Outlook, so like an M365, something like that, those should work. But just make sure it won't probably accept your just at Yahoo email address. It'll ask for your company, all that information. Um, Looks like they've changed this form a little bit. You used to have to actually request, yeah, looks like they did change it. You used to have to explicitly request what you were going to use the models for. So they would ask kind of at a high level what content you were going to be generating with it. It looks like they've gotten rid of that for the most part and are just here. So yeah, you can now go in here, put a request in, and get access. This used to take a couple weeks. I think I've seen it as quick as a day now, but your mileage may vary. So, like I was talking about, the impetus for this talk, I was kind of grown up in a really weird time where smartphones weren't kind of the thing yet, but we still had unlimited texting. So, you're just getting the age of smartphone. Uh, People could text. Nobody really called anymore. And people had a lot of questions. So Google wasn't quite at your fingertips like it is today. So that kind of comes about with this company called ChaCha, which was founded in the early 2000s. The idea was you could text a phone number and then the answer would come back to you. So think of like Google, but in a text message. I think Ask Jeeves was another one, or a bunch of different like precursors to Google, essentially. So the company raised over $6 million in development funds. So just think about that substantial amount of investment to do this. And then they even got another couple million down here at the bottom. So almost, was that over $20 million to do this? And now we can build this for free today. And to do that, we're going to end up doing some text messaging. So we will basically take an ingress of a text message. I used Twilio just because at the time it had a dev account that you could do text messages from, and it was free. So you got like $25 of free messages, and you didn't have to worry about paying for anything. You could send and receive. There is a little bit of a caveat to that today. I believe you have to be not on a trial account with to be able to have a text message go in and out. I think that's in the US. That's specifically in the US. I know it's a newer thing that they put out to try to get rid of spams. I'm not 100% certain if that's everywhere, but what you need to do to get off a trial account is either, I believe, associate it with your credit card so that that way they can associate that you're a real person with a real credit card. And then there's webhooks that will go into a Logic app. So that way we can do very low code, no code, not really pay for it. And then that Logic app goes to Azure Open AI. So I think to dig into this infrastructure a little more, let's go ahead and start with Azure Open AI, and we'll work our way kind of backwards. When I first did this talk, the only AI offering really was Azure Open AI. So this is where we'll start, and then we'll talk about AI Studio and kind of go from there. So when you first come to Azure Open AI, there is a few different places. It'll first say there's no deployments connected. So this is literally what it'll look like. Let's go ahead and make a deployment real quick. So we can call it deployment. Let's use a 3.5 turbo. So I'd say if you don't really know exactly what you're going to be using your models for, 3.5 turbo is kind of the best bang for your buck model. It's cheap. It's works pretty well. If you're going to go up or need more thought process or thinking through it, I would use the GPT-4o just because it tends to be, I believe it's half the price of 4 and has like 4 times the power. So if 3.5 turbo isn't quite getting you where you need, feel free to do that. There is also, let me find here, Azure. If you want to search, not every region is feature parity either. So if you want to look at your specific region and what models are available, there is a model availability chart. Oh, where is it? See if I can find it on the fly. Right here. So standard deployment is your serverless deployment. So that would be, purely consumption based. So depending on what region you're in, you might need to check here. And this is updated fairly frequently of what specifically you're going to be trying to use. So for example, base GPT-4 is, I don't think, hosted in the US anymore. So we would have to use something like GPT-4, this preview one, or 4.0. And I believe, yeah, this chart it doesn't really look like it in this window, but it expands to the right. So if you're trying to do Whisper, Dolly, text embeddings, so on and so forth, you can come in here and see what regions have what offerings. So depending on where you're at, you can pick a region close to you. If you can't, you can also go over the Azure Backbone, which is just have a region not nearby you, but that could add in some additional latency. So just be aware of that. So we have our deployment. It does take around 10-ish minutes for it to be ready. We can see if it's ready yet, but it might not be. Oh, it looks like it's ready quickly. So there's a few different ways to play with this. There is chat and there's completions. Completions, I would say, is kind of like the V1, the earlier, the more simple way to do this. We can ask it for things like summarize key points from a financial report. And there's a bunch of different prompts here. Explain a SQL query. They can all give you some kind of high level ideas of what you want to do with the model once you finally get access to it. It also helps show you, for example, some prompt engineering. So if you notice here, we have the question, and then we use some prompt engineering techniques to start skewing the explanation because we want it to give us the answer, not continue on with something else. So you can do some stuff with that. It'll give you some ideas. One thing that I really thought was funny was where was generate a product name ideas. So when I was messing around, like just trying to find just things on the internet, when I was pretending to start a business, I say pretending because it was just kind of like a half-hearted kind of attempt. There was entire companies out there that would generate product name ideas, they would generate logos, they generate all these things, and they charge you for them. Now in Azure Open AI, literally just as one of the main examples, we can have it generate ideas for us. Oh, and it looks like 3.5 Turbo does not work with completions, but if it did, we do have deployments. Let's see if I refresh it, if it's gonna. Weird. It's being a little bit picky today. We can show you on chat, the chat version, how that works. So let's do generate product name ideas. And it actually shows you the code for how to do this. So if you're trying to put this into your app, today it basically puts out an API for you to use. So if we look at JSON, it's just a RESTful call. So any system that you're using that can make a REST call could be augmented with AI. So you have your endpoint, you have your API key, and then you have all the different languages that it supports. So you have your basic curl and JSON. So that shows you anything that can make an API call can then be augmented with AI. And then you have some of your bigger languages like Java, Go, JavaScript, Python. Go's a newer one, so I think they're even adding to this example list. So you should be able to just copy and paste this and drop it in, and then you can use AI in your app. You have some of these parameters here on the side. Those actually affect your outcome. So temperature controls the randomness. So it tries to make it more or less deterministic. So it's kind of make the model think or think less is a good way to think about that. Max token length is how much you want to allow the individual prompt to use. So tokens are something that basically you can kind of think of it like fuel for your car or like a game at an arcade. You got to put your tokens in to use the system. You can set a max token limit. It breaks down to roughly 4 characters of English, tends to be about 1 token. So you have to have tokens for the model to first read your input. You use tokens kind of like fuel for the model to then think, and then it returns the answer to you. Stop sequences are if you want it to stop at a desired point and stop generating further token responses. So if it says a specific keyword or something that you know that, oh, hey, this is the end of what I want, models sometimes like to be verbose. So what you can do is say like a message to do XYZ and return it in this format. You can put a stop sequence in there, especially if you see the model is always trying to append more data or try to be a little bit too helpful. You can put an additional stop sequence so it'll generate your answer, hit the point you want it to, stop, and then you're good to go. Top probabilities, this is kind of similar to temperature. You can let the model choose from high and low likelihoods and adjust that. Frequency penalty is how often a particular question is represented in the final output. So if you, it'll increase or decrease because it essentially creates multiple answers for you. and you can adjust this to see how much that it affects that. Presence penalty is how often a particular token has appeared in the text at all so far. So you can, if you put that way high, you can kind of encourage the model to come with like maybe more out of the box or from left field thinking. And then we also have a pre-response text or post-response text. You can think of that of if you've ever tried to join a chat bot or something, for example, like internet providers like to have those here. You join it and it's like, hello, how are you doing today? Pre-response text. When you end the call or end the messaging or IM, it says, thanks for your business, blah, 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 post-response text. So you can have both of those. You can trigger them. You can pass it in as part of your JSON object. Let me click on Dolly real quick, just so, looks like Dolly is not available in US West, but I have another deployment that I think we can play with Dolly. So we'll come back to that. And then we have chat. So chat has some cool capabilities here. At a high level, it looks very similar to what we were just doing. We can have some examples here to add more few shot answer generation. So the model knows what kind of sample or example format that you want your answer in. We can do a system message. So this is kind of like a persona is a good way to think about it. And they've actually shown that there is statistical relevance that if you give it a better system prompt or system message, it tends to generate better output for you just by giving it a persona and kind of a person to pretend to be. We also have some templates here. So if you don't know kind of what you're trying to do, for example, we can do an Xbox customer support agent. And it has some pre-written system prompts here to give you kind of a starting point or what that kind of should look like and some examples. So let's go back to our custom one, our default one. The other thing we can do is we can do safety system messages to insert. So ungrounded content, all these. We'll talk a little bit more about these in the AI Studio, but we can do that here as well. We can show the JSON response. So when you make an API call in a chat, the biggest difference you'll see here is the past messages included. So this gives us kind of a way to emulate memories with our OpenAI agent because I can ask it, for example, where is Omaha NE? So it's a city in Nebraska in the United States, and I can ask it what sports teams are there. And if you notice, because I provided this previous message with this slider, it did have reference that like as a normal human conversation, it's assuming we're still talking about Omaha. So I didn't have to explicitly say what sports teams are there in Omaha. It now remembers that part of that conversation that we said, hey, we're still in Omaha. You can see here, we can adjust this slider. Adding more messages does add more content, so it will cost you more tokens. So that's another thing to be a little bit mindful of. We may not always want to include the past 20 messages if it's not something that's going to be super relevant. And we can view the code of that as well. It's just slightly different and a slightly different endpoint. We can see the temperature, all those fields we talked about previously. We can show the JSON. So this is actually the response that we're getting back. So we're sending the role of the system. You have 3 different personas, I believe. You have the system, which is where your system message is. You have the user, which is you. And then you have the assistant, which is the response. So system, user, assistant are kind of the main 3 that you'll play with. And that allows you to also read, when you're reading the prompts back, seeing where there's new ones, where there's old ones, all that sort of stuff. And then if we go to parameters, these are all the parameters we've seen before. Max response is a token limit, stop sequence, and then we have all of the other dials that we saw previously. Let me go over. Oh, I did the wrong. So if I go to here, and I think this is the one that is not in US West. Nope. This one is in East US. Okay. So we can go to Dolly. These are the prompts. So these are actually generated every time you come here. So they are unique every single time you come. We can ask it questions like a guy fishing in the style of watercolor. This has gotten drastically better, I think, since the first time I've used like even Dolly 2. This is also a fun way to practice prompt engineering. So if you're trying to get better at prompting or getting it to spit out exactly what you want it to, it definitely it's very visual and very literal of what it does every single time. So it's kind of fun to see. And we have a guy fishing. I don't know what's the. I can't quite tell what that is. It looks like it might be. Looks almost like a bird or a cat or something. That's interesting. But it's different every single time. So if you want to keep it, make sure you download it. Shows you the code of how to do that as well. Download it, generate a new image, copy the prompt, or delete it. If you delete it, it is completely gone forever. So just remember that. We also have a few different prompts here. So different dials we can do of the image size, the image style, and then the quality. And these just cost a little bit different depending on how you generated a model. We also have the assistance playground. So there's a tool coming out from Microsoft called AutoGen, or it's an open source project. The idea is that you create essentially multiple assistants, kind of think of like a microservice architecture. And each individual assistant will have different use cases, and then you can wire them together or orchestrate them together. And they can actually call out to different APIs. So we can add a function. For example, there's a get weather one. So we'll go and determine the weather. Turn that on. We can also upload files if we want to try chatting with our data and not using something like a search index. So what is the weather? Oh, I need to save it first. What is the weather? What is the weather? Interesting. Okay. Well, typically, let me try refreshing. When in doubt, empty cache and refresh. Okay. Weird. Well, you'll, I guess, just have to take my word for it that it typically works. Yeah, it's like it doesn't even want to talk to the model. That's interesting. Do I have a deployment? I do. Weird. Okay. Well, apparently it's being a little difficult today. And then assistants are only available in a few other regions. So that's why I have multiple OpenAI instances. They are free or they're consumption based. So you only pay for what you use, so you can deploy them wherever you want. So the newest thing Microsoft kind of announced, and we talked about a little bit with content safety, is AI Studio. So AI Studio, I would say, is kind of like a bigger, more feature-rich Azure Open AI. There's a lot more models than just the OpenAI ChatGPT ones. So we can actually go to the models catalog, and we have we've now broken 1,700 models. So you got your Meta, your Phi 3, a bunch of other ones. We can actually deploy a lot of these on virtual machines if we want to. We have quite a few open source models as well. We can search and try to get help by, depending on what kind of question we want to use or what kind of prompt. We can do that: multi-object tracking, object detection, question answering, uh, different kinds of tasks, conversational. So it'll give us the models that thinks are best for that. Deployment options. So serverless is managed compute, or sorry, serverless or managed compute. So this would be like hosting it on a VM in Azure. This would be serverless API, so you only pay when you use it. And there's quite a few models even out there for serverless. So we can go ahead and deploy any of these and use them right away. There's some benchmarks, so you can actually go in and see where Azure is ranking each model on their benchmarks. So the higher up is, the more accurate it answers its questions. So you can see all of the models compared against each other. If you go on different websites and whatnot, some companies make it pretty difficult to see where those are, but here you can go ahead and compare and see how everything compares against each other, which is kind of cool. And we can even filter down. So if there's only specific models I care about, I can see, for example, how let's just do how all the llamas are comparing against each other. So we can see how that works and compares against each other, and then the different benchmarking they went through, which is kind of cool. Different data sets, we can play with all those. Prompt catalog, we can actually share and make a way for us each to see each other's prompts. So you can do that in here. If we have common prompts, or if you have somebody who's really good at writing prompts, they can share it amongst your team. Think of it as like a repository for prompts. There's a bunch of different examples they have. So if you want to start with one, like a JSON formatter assistant, we can see what that system prompt would look like.
Alec,
Yeah.
just one came in there. How is it actually score calculated?
It depends on the benchmarking. So each of these are kind of open source benchmarks. So we can go ahead and pick one. For example, GSM 8K. This is where they all would average on them depending on the model. And it's just the accuracy of when it goes through these kind of more standardized tests of what its score is at the end. So depending on the test, there's different ones. So you can think of it as like, I don't know if they have it here. I don't think they do, because I think most models can now solve it pretty easily. But like the LSAT, so like to be a lawyer, that used to be a exam that they used to always compare it against until everybody started to do really well on it. But you could dig into each one of these and see kind of what specifically they're grading it on, what the question base is. Is it image recognition? Is it social, or any of that sort of thing?
Yes, so he just added there, no, there's no such standard test as far as I know for LLMs. That's just what they added.
Yeah, there's some people that are trying to make standard tests. It's kind of open if people decide to partake in it or not. These are just some of the bigger ones. So you can go out, and there is some like open source standards for benchmarking, but again, it's kind of open source and it depends if the model itself goes through it. So this has some scores of some of the bigger ones. There isn't, you're correct, there isn't like a universal benchmark. And you can kind of see that here as well. There's like 15 of these. So maybe if you look at these, you can kind of see where your use case would fall. Like maybe you have a specific one that would show and skew this output of, maybe bool q is kind of along the lines of your use case. You don't really care if the model's good in these other ones, because this benchmark is more representative of your use case of how you're going to use models. So that's one way that you could use models as an end user, or these benchmarks as an end user. Figure which data set is relevant to you, and that could skew what model you end up using as well. Because again, if you're going to have more of a custom built model, maybe you don't care to get the highest average model. You want the one that is more accurate to your use case.
Yes, so they just added again, sorry there. These are just some data sets, but what does accuracy mean when we do chat?
So sure. So accuracy as far as this score goes, and there's some um,
Then
more
they added,
information here.
I'm talking about the relationship between the accuracy score in the diagram and the metrics.
Yeah, so some of these data sets do have, I believe they have they have questions that go along with them, and then they're graded. So they ask questions to see how well the model can um, understand essentially the data set, and then uh, put the data back out to the end user. So that's where the accuracy is kind of in there, built in, of how well. And these are kind of the four metrics. We can actually dig in a little bit more, but there's accuracy, coherence, so how well the model can do an output that flows, fluency, and then there's GPT similarity. All four of these are averaged out and then passed in for their score. So you can see how well it thinks it's going to answer your questions, all that sort of stuff. Does that help?
It might take a while for them to answer, but
Yeah, no worries. It kind of depends too. Like I wouldn't put a bunch of weight into these benchmarks because some people build models to be really great against certain benchmarks or certain data sets. And because they're fine tuned to do a specific use case, or basically to excel in a certain data set, they might beat everybody super, like just might be so much more performant, so much more powerful because it was built custom for a particular data set. I think what this is trying to show is that across multiple data sets, across multiple benchmarks that they've determined, uh, here's kind of where the models exist. But I don't think there's not going to be like a universal benchmark today that you can say here is the best overall model because this benchmark encompasses everything. Just because a lot of these models are still, even the frontier models of like you have your GPTs, your Gemini, um, there really isn't a best model for every single use case because every use case is so different and unique. Feel free to chime in if you get more questions. Otherwise, so this is where I was kind of talking about we have content safety. So Azure is starting to build this out so we can actually do what's called LLM ops. So we can put these kind of things in our CI/CD pipelines. This is new as of May, I believe. Whenever build was, it was either May or March. We can now put a score out of 10 for all of these and see if we believe that our models are still safe and secure. So we can do prompt shielding that will try to protect our model from being jailbroken. So I don't know if you've seen it before, that if you put in the right system prompt or the right prompt in the chat, somebody can essentially hijack your model and have it do things that you shouldn't expect. Mark Grasinovich has been really big on putting out different research papers and different ways they've jailbroken models to kind of share, hey, um, some of them are systemic issues with all LLMs and they can all work together to make them safer. And then Microsoft puts this in front of it. So that way your models won't be hijacked. Another one you can look up to is, I believe it was a Chevy dealership in the US where somebody got the model to reply, this is a legally binding agreement. They bought a fully loaded SUV for $1. No givesies backsies or something like that. So if you just look at like Chevy dealership, no givesies backsies, it'll have the full story. Um, and then there was, I believe, an Air Canada person that, or who was trying to fly, and for some reason needed a refund on their ticket, and the model said, "Oh, you're fine, you'll get a refund." And then the airline tried to refuse it, and the courts decided that um, because her question was told by a model who's basically an assistant for the airline, that they have to honor the refund. But that could be groundedness detection. So how well the model is grounded to your data. You can put that in a pipeline and we can run that score every single time before we deploy. So if we think about it, if you're changing data, changing models, changing inputs to it, we can kind of get maybe a canary deployment of, hey, your model is no longer grounded to your data, something's going wrong. Moderate text and protected materials, different things. If we want to maybe not have it go through, we can put that in there as well. Chat is very similar to the chat we just had in OpenAI. The OpenAI one is just only for OpenAI. We can evaluate, so we can do different evaluations, add in our prompt flow. We can view the code like we did before. Again, this is very similar. We can deploy to a web app, which is kind of cool. And then we can import JSON files. If we use Prompty is the new thing they're coming out with, a way to kind of take copilots and putting it in JSON. And then,
Alex, sorry, that guy just added again. It's like, I'm interested in how Azure or OpenAI calculate the accuracy score. Accuracy means by classification that the prediction is equal to the real data. But in chat, there's no prediction. I do benchmark of my own developed chatbot against what ChatGPT does and compare the rogue or blue score. That is one kind of metric people use in academics 2 years ago, but I'm more interested in how Azure did the benchmark here in the studio.
yeah, so these benchmarks are calculated just on the baseline native models. So it wouldn't be your chatbot specifically. So these would be just a deployment of, for example, if I take an off-the-shelf Llama 3 or a Llama 2 13 billion parameter chat or 13 billion, this is the off-the-shelf just plain model. There's nothing, you could deploy this with a Hugging Face. You could deploy this here. You could deploy it wherever. This is just the out of the box, and then they run it against these benchmarks to see what they have, what it thinks the value is. So, and the value is the summation of all these. Accuracy, I believe, is the highest weighted one. But again, not all of these benchmarks are super great. So if you look here, we have the average, which is the line that we saw when we deploy or when we select them all. So this wouldn't go against your specific model. Like what you deploy would not go against this unless you explicitly put it in there and tried to run the benchmark yourself. But you would have to look into doing that. I'm not 100% sure on if you can easily benchmark all these or not against all these open. I think some of these are open, so you would be able to potentially do that. But again, that would have to be something that you'd have to work on. I don't know if Azure today kind of has a way to just essentially do that.
Someone just asked there, do test phase queries cost money?
Do test questions cost money?
He said queries, but could mean questions. Yeah.
Yes, it does. So these do cost tokens. So if we look at here. So if you search for pricing, this is where things get a little confusing, is everything is token based. So when I was talking about a word in English is about 4 characters to 1 token, we can see here of all the models, here's how much the input costs, here's how much the output costs per 1,000 token. So the input is the model reading what you're doing and thinking about it. The output is the text that comes out of it. All of them cost tokens. If it says NA, that's usually because that region doesn't have that particular deployment. So we can actually go in there and see all of the different pricing here. So for example, that image I generated is going to cost me, they tend not to round up too bad. So like I probably won't actually pay for it, but uh, $4 divided by 100, it's about 4 cents. So I'll pay about 4 cents US for it. And then here's all of the other models of what they cost in pricing. So things you can do if that scares you, because it's very open-ended, and that's a common concern we get a lot, is you can set a cap so that you can't go over. That can be subscription wise, person wise, or tenant wise. So you can just say, here's the cap. Um, Also, then working on the prompt engineering, so we can do like, I think I have a model deployed. So if you look here, I use 21 tokens to say test because it's passing history, system message, and then the maximum request. So it'll tell you about how many tokens you're using in the playground. Every time you get a response back, you do get that as well. And then we have our assistants, our deployments, connectors, compute instances if we deploy models to VMs, different users, and content filtering. We can go in here and say like if there's specific words that we don't want to talk about, and then you can set different things. For example, Microsoft like to use, if you're a like sporting goods company, maybe you don't really care if people are talking about axes, or um, if you sell different like pesticides or whatever, you might be less sensitive on the violent scale because you want to kill bugs or kill weeds or kill something. Kill in that frame of your business might be a little less sensitive than if you're like in some field that is not. So you can come into here and do different content filtering as well.
Alec, that person just added there. Will we see a token exchange like stock exchange for multi-model use cases in the future within Azure AI Studio?
Each model does charge a little bit different token. So you could see that it's consumption based. So it's as you use it. I don't know if it's like you can pre-purchase model or tokens to save money, but I don't know if you could then exchange it like a stock market. That would be an interesting kind of thing. But if you can pre-purchase your consumption, they do give it to you at a discount. So you could buy it from Microsoft kind of like in a stock exchange, but I don't know if you'd be able to resell it back to like the open market, if that makes sense. And then we will roll back to here. So we've kind of gone through the OpenAI services. And if you want to reach out to me on LinkedIn with more questions, feel free. I can clarify as much as I can or try to ask around to get some more if I'm a little bit vague on some of them. So we've kind of gone through OpenAI. We can go through the Logic app, and we'll fly through this just for the sake of time here. This is the wrong window. I think this is the one I wanted. So here's a Logic app that we've used to deploy this. We can go through the designer. This is really ugly just because I am not great at Logic apps. This is, I think, the second or third one I've written. But we first receive the message from Twilio. So it puts out a URL. And then in Twilio, we put a webhook that says whenever you receive a text message, post to here. This is the object that's going to come in. I'm going to initialize some variables. I'm going to make, and I will be rotating the keys after this call. So we can actually receive this in. This particular example is going to also add translation. So we'll get that request in. We'll go ahead and make a call out to Azure Open AI and then return the response back to Twilio. And we can jump over to here. And then Twilio, it's not super crazy. I would show it. You just set webhooks in a configuration behind the scenes and pay for a phone number. The cool part, I think, is this. So here's a high level of what we just talked about. And when I make a text to this phone number, it said, what is Omaha known for? Omaha, Nebraska is known for its vibrant music scene, blah, blah, blah. And then I can ask it, tell me more about the Heartland Developers Conference, which is a conference we have here. And then it knows more about that one specifically as well. Another sample that I will show, if you want to build this yourself, that's kind of fun. You can do the same thing with just an HTTP call, and you can use a translator. So what I've built this for is kind of being a universal translator, like you can think of like Star Trek or any sort of being able to talk to anybody. I used OpenAI Translate, and then I used an Azure AI Search Index to use RAG to have some of our data. I have that actually out on my website. So Azure Barista, uh, getting started. This one, building a universal translation bot. So similar flow. I do a step-by-step walking you through how to do all of that. And then at the very end, we can actually ask it a question. I used my printer manual. So I asked it how to change the LCD, or sorry, what the buttons do. And then it tells us back in Spanish, even though my document's in English. So behind the scenes, it'll take this prompt, translate it to English, ask our document store and AI what the actual question is in English, and then take the answer back from English and put it back into Spanish. And we can do that dynamically because we identified the language coming in dynamically, save it off in one of those variables we showed, and then use that to then know, hey, our document source is in English, so we hard code translate it from the parameter that it came in at to something else, to English, save what it came in at, answer the question in English, and put it back into whatever it came in at. And that also is one of the workshops we put on the Azure Cloud workshops. So again, if you want to walk through this, the goal was I have all of the bicep created and scripts. So if you can log in, you can do that. And then I built it in kind of like a challenge. So if you want to try to figure out how to do it all on your own, it kind of goes step by step. If you get stuck, I do also have different hints to try to push you along too. So if you want to build this yourself, feel free. I think we're about at time. Is there any other questions?
Yeah. Um, so we have two actually very long questions in anyways. So
Sure.
this might take a while to read. Um, I've been using Azure Open AI for building enterprise solutions. One of the most challenging questions I've been facing is a lack of auto upgrade of API version after an existing GA version of API version is retired. The API version is a required parameter as part of the HTTP REST API calls
Mm-hmm.
endpoint. MS MS official guidance asks developers to change the code. Yes, I can change the code, but practically speaking, it does not work for companies who hired external developers slash consultants who delivered and left the project already. I have a workaround that is automated, but it's less elegant. I'm looking for ideas slash solutions before Microsoft is willing to introduce an auto upgrade slash replacement mechanism.
Yeah, that's something I've faced as well, especially when you go API versions and the entire data structure changes in like the contract layer. So I think when you're using bring your own data, all of the things that needed hyphens before went to underscores. And I think there was a bridge version where it accepted either, but if you go to latest, it just doesn't. And then they can keep changing around how they do citations. So citations used to be a separate own object. Now it's like encompassed in the object that comes back. And I do have feedback I'm giving to the product team. So we had a project specifically we're working on where we like the relevance score. So we would ask a question of basically multiple data sets, and then we try to use it like kind of like Google. And the citation score used to be a property that we liked because then we could rank them, basically take multiple data sets, rank them, and it'd be kind of like Google, right? So we could slam together multiple data sets. I'm talking to Microsoft at some point, I hope this week or maybe next. And if you want to reach out to me on LinkedIn, I can ask that question as well to see if they have any sort of plans or recommendations. Because I agree, especially when there's breaking changes, it's kind of difficult to, and that's me. If you want to follow me, add me, feel free to hit connect. I'll accept you. Um, that's something I've also noticed is difficult or painful of when it's completely a different breaking change. But
Perfect. So just the next question is, Dear Mr. Harrison, thank you for your presentation. I've been trying out Azure AI Studio and Azure Open AI Studio for a while, and it turns out that the Azure Cognitive Search service is required if I build customized chatbot and even without any usage of the surface. It costs a lot per month as some kind of fixed price or cost.
Mhm.
In contrast to that, using OpenAI GPT model as LLM costs just 10% at most. Do you have any idea why it's the case?
Um, so if you're trying to bring in data, you do need an AI search. I believe there is, and this is where it's a little bit weird. If you go to pricing, I believe there is a free tier of Azure OpenAI search. Yeah, so there is a free tier. Go ahead and try that. If you're doing only the portal, I believe the portal for some reason, and I've asked Microsoft this, I think it's because I asked people that build this, so take it with a grain of salt. Not 100% sure how true this is, but I think there was some latency at one point that the free tier of AI search did not respond quick enough. So when you would add a data source or something, you had to be at least standard, or I think it was basic or above, if I remember right. Um, they should be, I believe if you go and make the API calls yourself and specify a free tier, it does work, if I remember correctly. You just have to be the person to do that. And the free tier, you get like, I think one per subscription. If you're not asking it any questions of your data, you shouldn't need one, period. If you're just asking it question and answer, but that kind of uh, isn't super exciting then at that point. Uh, so like, for example, if you come into here and you want to use like blob storage, for example, it does need an AI search instance and it does require you to have at least standard when you go through this. But I think if you go through this, get the request, so like what the API call looks like and do it and specify a free tier, I think it still works. Because I'm pretty sure I've done it with a basic tier and it wants you to be at least, I think, standard to have this work.
Perfect. So just the last question there, I believe, is I have a student working to benchmark RAG against LO or A on specific domain.
Hmm.
We are looking for a platform to experiment with batch calls. Do Azure offer such batch processing in AI Studio?
Yes. It's a newer feature, I believe, because you're, um, oh, what's it called? I think it was announced at Build. You can actually do batch processing, and they even have a cheaper, I think tokens are 40% off if you do non, um, basically demand time, and they give you a TLA of, I think it's, sorry, an SLA of 24-hour turnaround. What's it called? Let's see if my Google Foo's any good. So there is batch endpoints. There's some information on Microsoft Learn. And then there is also a discounted rate if you use the tokens in non-peak compute timing. So it's, I think it's a 40-ish, if I remember right, at build discount. I don't know if that has been They announced it at Build. I don't know if it's generally available yet. So that's something you might need to look into, but that would mean to me that they allow batching because they allow you to queue up your jobs and do non-peak compute. So I would think so.
Perfect. So I think that's it. So on behalf of the ESPC community, we'd like to extend a big thank you to you again, Alec, for taking the time out to carry this webinar. We really appreciate it.
Yeah, no problem. If you have any questions or follow-ups, feel free to reach out. Happy to help.
So that's the end of today's webinar. You can find this webinar and more at sharepointeurope.com/resource center. Thanks again to all of you for joining us today, and I hope you join us again soon. Take care.
Bye, everybody.